Intellectual property is the issue most Americans have heard nothing about, yet affects them on a daily basis. It controls most every aspect of technology, gives incentive to those who would bring new, innovative things into reality, and unfortunately is also one of the biggest barriers to competition facing the nation. So, in this first of a multi-part series, I want to discuss with you some of the problems that IP causes us in today's modern world. But before we begin, we first need to understand IP. Intellectual property is enshrined within our Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 says, "To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to the respective writings and discoveries." Yet, even with this section, our founding fathers were quite skeptical when it came to supporting copyrights and patents. After all, they were regularly infringing on the copyrights of British books so as to keep the colonies educated and up to date. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Ben Franklin all thought that the instant an idea was divulged, it became public. They also worried that government-granted monopolies might lead to more bad than good, so they came up with a sensible solution. The Copyright Act of 1790 set a copyright length of 14 years with a 14-year extension possible if the creator was still alive. It was fairly reasonable amount of time in which the creator might enjoy the exclusive right of ownership, creation, and distribution. Today, however, intellectual property is not so reasonable. Especially since the internet came into prominence in the late 90s, intellectual property has become a business model, one that gets abused for the sake of profit. Organizations who do nothing but buy IP from someone else then turn around and demand exorbitant licensing fees, or start suing every company they can for easy settlement money. After all, the average cost to defend a patent lawsuit is over $1 million. This evil, which Madison worried about, seems to have come to fruition. See, current IP law has created a culture of corporate welfare, entitlement to those who create not for the promotion of science and useful arts, but for profit. And what sucks is that we cannot even know how badly our IP laws hurt innovation because we simply don't know what isn't able to be produced right now based on the current system. Those in favor of stronger IP laws would say that nothing is being hindered as long as you pay a licensing fee. That doesn't exactly work if you're a young musician trying to remix several songs at thousands of dollars per song. It's simply unobtainable. Then there's the problem of culture and history being locked behind copyright, where it will remain for most of our lifetimes. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, for example, are fantastically important to our nation's culture and history, but they're currently being held by the King estate under copyright. It's exactly why the movie Selma had to change the words in Dr. King's speech, because if they hadn't, they would have been infringing on said copyright. Now, if you think that's bad, consider this. Copyright has also been used and abused by Major League Baseball, the NFL, and the NBA over the last 20 years. Would you believe they justifiably felt that player names and player stats like batting average and ERA were part of their copyright? Now, thankfully, they lost all those cases involving stats as copyright, so we are now freely able to discuss whips in public. But the notion that organizations use intellectual property to stifle innovation is more common than you might think, especially on the internet and with technology where everything relies on copying data from one place to another. That's just how computers work. You fetch data, you process data, then you write data back. It's a classic risk instruction pipeline, and it shows how computers are natural copyright violators in this regard. So that was copyright, but now consider patents. Patents are one reason why medical costs are so high. You might have heard stories about ridiculously expensive drugs like Sovaldi, a hepatitis C drug, or medicines that were cheap but become very expensive once they are given exclusive market rights or retroactive patents, like say Makena, a drug used to help prevent premature births in pregnant women. The monopoly rights granted by the government for such treatments result in overly expensive medicine and, worse, wreaks havoc on our government budgets. Competition, a key tenet to capitalism, is thrown out the window. in favor of protecting profits. And believe it or not, it still gets worse. Intellectual property has gotten to the point where it challenges the very idea of ownership. In Verner v. Autodesk back in 2010, Autodesk won a lawsuit by saying that physical copies of their software that people bought were not actually owned. Rather, they were licensed, like a perpetual rental. Software modifications or resell was thus not allowed. Then, in this year, 2015, John Grendier claimed people don't really own their tractors. Instead, they had an implied license for the life of the vehicle to operate the vehicle. You have no right to self-repair, no right to modify, no right to diagnose, none of that. And General Motors said the same thing about cars, claiming that buyers do not own the car, and thus it is illegal to run vehicle software diagnostics, do self-repairs, or even modify your car. This is what they wrote to Congress. I kid you not. Remember, copyright and patents are meant to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. That was the original intent, and that intent has been perverted into some malicious, profit-craving beast. It is important to understand this and understand why intellectual property is such a core component to issues we face as a nation. Please keep this in mind throughout the rest of this video series as I show you how IP functions as a source for many problems with healthcare, taxes, job growth, trade agreements, and more. So thank you so much for watching. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.